And welcome back, fellow football fanatics, to another episode of College Football with Sam Live. We will be talking about a few quarterback battles that are either ongoing or have already been settled today. Alabama's has been settled. We'll be discussing my thoughts on that. Ohio State's is ongoing, and I will be giving you a prediction as to who is going to win that battle. I think the majority of us are in agreement there. Whether the expert fan, the casual fan, the analyst, or I would even imagine Ohio State's coaching staff. I think many of us at least think we know the outcome of that battle. I also want to posit the question as to whether or not Michigan can win it all in 2025. Key distinction there. Can, not will, can. So different thing right there. I will tell you I am not picking Michigan to win it all this year. I have picked Penn State, and I would pick other teams before Michigan, but I want to entertain the possibility. And we also are going to discuss my top 5 most impactful Nebraska players and what USC playing to its potential looks like, because USC has not played to its potential, I would say, since the mid, maybe late 2000s, but it already fell off by 2009, and then obviously 2010 after Carroll left, Lane Kiffin started there, and that's really when the mess and the downhill trend began, or at least was obvious to everyone. Obviously, Pete Carroll's final year there, where they went 9-4, was not spectacular. So that means the last time USC played to its potential and was a dynasty, which is what USC is when it's at its potential, was before Saban's Alabama dynasty got started. Pretty fascinating. So we'll talk about that. Before we get started, I encourage all of you to make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, that you have hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be live tomorrow at 6 p.m. and also kind of a special show on Friday. Moving forward, Friday is going to be an off day for me where I won't really be touching much of anything to do with my laptop or phone or anything college football. And that's just because I'm going to be covering this sport really in 5 live shows, and sometimes if there's breaking news, even more. And there will be content out on a daily basis. So I will just need one day to somewhat keep my sanity together. But since we don't have any games this Saturday, I'm going to use this Saturday as more of that day where I don't go live. And since we didn't go live yesterday, I want to, be live and talk more college football on Friday, because there's a lot more I want to discuss and predict in relationship to the preseason. And the preseason is going to be up in fewer than 2 weeks. So we're going to have to talk about that. We'll do a question and answer session at the end here. Going to be 30, 45 minutes long. Super chats are encouraged, and those will be prioritized. But if you just want to ask me a question for free, shoot it out, and I might answer that one too, because sometimes the questions that don't cost anything are the best. In fact, there are several instances where that has been true. I see some Go Big Reds in the chat. Go Big Red to you, Saray and Taylor Slots, and Andrew Anderson. We will be talking about Nebraska and these impact players shortly. But first and foremost, I want to talk about Ohio State's quarterback battle and my thoughts on it ultimately. So Julian Sayin and Lincoln Kienholz are battling for that quarterback 1 spot. Who's going to be the starting quarterback for the Buckeyes and really take the helm in another season of Ryan Day being the head coach? But outside of that, a lot of unknowns, a lot of questions, a lot of changes. And this is, of course, relative to Ohio State. I'm never going to say that Ohio State won't be a top 10 team, barring something disastrous or unforeseen, as long as you tell me that Ryan Day is the head coach and the team didn't tragically die in a plane crash, for example. And I want to look at Julian Sayin first and foremost. That's who I want to look at, because Julian Sayin is expected to win this job by many. Many right now are saying he's pulling away. In fact, if you read between the lines from Ohio State's fall camp reports, regardless of who is reporting on Ohio State's fall camp, the consensus at quarterback is, hey, Sayin's pulling away here. And whether or not Day is going to name him the starter or not this week or next week or the day before kickoff, Sayin is the guy. That's what I'm hearing. That's what many people are hearing. That is what I'm reading with my own two eyes. Sayin is 6'1", 203 pounds. He was a 98 overall rated recruit in the 2024 class, really only behind Dylan Raiola there in the same class, obviously, as DJ Lagway. Unlike Lagway and Raiola, he didn't play. Why? Because his team was a national championship team last year, literally, not just a contender. They won it all, and they had a veteran, Will Howard, who took the reins and did a phenomenal job in the playoffs. They didn't need him to start to have any hope of winning big games, such as Florida or Nebraska did in 2024. Sayin has very limited experience. He saw limited action in 2024, wasn't all sunshine and roses, and he was the third stringer behind Devin Brown. But nonetheless, I think that the 5 of 12, about 40 completion percentage and only 84 yards and touchdown, that's too small of a sample size to judge as to whether or not those poor numbers are him or are just a result of having very limited action. And I would think it's the latter. I've already been open in saying that he'll be probably a mid-tier Big Ten quarterback during kickoff or at kickoff. And by the end of the year, he will be in the upper echelon of Big Ten quarterbacks. You have to trust Ryan Day with that. You have to trust the supporting cast, the assessment and evaluations done by multiple recruiting analysts, and those evaluations only get more accurate over time. Sayin's strengths are his quick release, a good arm, accuracy. Saban has praised him before and obviously wanted him to be his future quarterback at Alabama. Things didn't pan out that way, so after really only spending a week or maybe a few weeks with Alabama, he transferred to Ohio State, which was another option. Ryan Day has recruited quarterbacks out of California before in C.J. Stroud and has been a phenomenal developer, so that was the connection. Sayin is not extremely mobile. He has shown elusiveness and awareness in the pocket and he's not Kyle McCord statue-esque, but he's not as mobile as Howard. I would venture in saying he's probably not as mobile as Stroud, certainly not as mobile as Fields, and he's very, very inexperienced, very green. This is only his second year on campus, and the likelihood that he would be a C.J. Stroud caliber quarterback, we just don't know, to be frank. And since Stroud is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL right now and was the best passing quarterback probably in Ohio State history, to say that he will be at that level in year one is certainly bold, but we will have to see about that. Right now, he's the favorite. He's in the lead. However, I look at Lincoln Kienholz, and Kienholz is a player who's been with the Buckeyes for an additional year. He was a 94 overall player, top 100 player in the 2023 class, 6'3", 207 pounds. He hasn't played since the Cotton Bowl where he looked like a disaster, but that was 2 years ago, and he wasn't really integrated in the system then. He was kind of thrusted in there after McCord opted out and went into the portal, and Devin Brown got hurt. Only has a 45.5 career completion percentage, 10 of 22 for 100 yards and about 5 yards per pass attempt. He's a dual threat quarterback. He has a good arm, some good traits, has elite potential, but as of right now, he's not better than really good at anything unless you want to count his rushing ability. I imagine that if he is the backup here, he will be involved some way, perhaps, in rushing packages, but we also saw in 2023 the claim that Devin Brown would be involved there, and even early on before he got hurt, he wasn't used all that much in that role, and they just elected to go with McCord, so I don't exactly know there. If he is the starter, I would imagine that that will certainly help Ohio State's rushing offense, which according to reports in a scrimmage has struggled recently, and it feels like the offensive line and defensive line are kind of now trading punches rather than the offensive line dominating the defensive line, which was the report earlier as fall camp really began. These are two talented young men who I think are each capable of leading a elite offense when you have Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, when you have Max Clare, and the potential they have at offensive line, running back, and then the myriad of play callers they could have, whether it's Hartline or Bowen, and I think Day is probably the best of them all, but since he's the head coach, he wants someone else to do it unless he has to. It's easier than at a lot of other places, but it's not easy regardless. Both of these quarterbacks are capable. I think that it's Sayan's job to lose. I think that he wins the job at the end of the day. I would be very surprised at this point if Keenholz ended up winning the starting quarterback job, and I think it is better for Ohio State that Sayan wins rather than Keenholz. I think that if Keenholz wins the job, there should be a little bit more concern than if Sayan wins the job. Not that you don't trust the staff. It's rather that the staff knows who's the best player, but Sayan's supposed to be the starter. Looking at his recruiting ranking, looking at the fact that he focused on football in high school, and Keenholz was a multi-sport athlete. And in the limited action we've seen, Sayan looked better as a true freshman, I believe, than Keenholz did as a true freshman. Now, to be fair, Keenholz played a really good Missouri team, again, to be fair, but Sayan is supposed to be the guy. I think that's why they brought him in, even when they already had Keenholz and Brown on the roster. And Sayan was ahead of Keenholz last year. Keenholz was the scout team quarterback. Sayan was the third stringer. So I think it would be a little bit of at least a yellow flag, if not a red flag, if Keenholz starts and Sayan doesn't. I do not think that Sayan is someone who lacks talent or the coaching staff to develop him. So I think that he will be developed into a great Ohio State and college football quarterback. He'll be the starter, and Lincoln Keenholz will be the backup. That's really the extent of my analysis when it comes to this quarterback battle, because Tavian St. Clair is a little bit too raw, a little bit too young right now, and I think that when you look at these two quarterbacks and look at how the staff wanted Sayan to come in, it was talked about last year by many, whether national analysts or Ohio State people and coaches, that his upside is limitless. The sky's the limit there, and he was already ahead of Keenholz. So I would be very shocked if Keenholz started. I think Sayan will walk out week 1 against Texas and be the starting quarterback at The Ohio State University. Now we can move on and discuss Alabama's quarterback battle, a quarterback battle that I am actually less optimistic about than Ohio State's, if I got to be honest with you all. I don't like the situation that Alabama's quarterbacks are in. I don't. And the reason I don't is because in observing how Jalen Milroe went down at Alabama for 2 years in a row, the fact that Ty Simpson couldn't beat him out or really contest for any significant playing time is kind of concerning. In 2023, Saban tried to get someone else to start ahead of Milroe because he didn't like the situation, and they were even worse than Milroe was. So what's changed here? Seriously, what's changed? And that's what I want to discuss here. Jalen Milroe is off, and Ty Simpson is in. Ty Simpson has been named the starting quarterback for the Alabama Crimson Tide, and while Ryan Grubb is here as the offensive coordinator for the Tide, and that is certainly an upgrade on that side of the football, and Alabama is one of the 25 best teams in America when it comes to returning production, I have concerns about this quarterback room. Let me take you back to 2023. Ty Simpson and Tyler Buckner are competing for that starting quarterback job. Jalen Milroe has been benched for the South Florida game, and Alabama's a heavy favorite. They're still viewed as one of the better teams in all of college football, despite their loss to Texas the week prior. And the team comes out, and they look like trash. They look horrible. And that was the game where the blinders come off of everyone, and it's revealed that despite Saban being the coach and Alabama having the most talented roster in college football per the blue chip ratio, that this is probably not a top 10 team to start the 2023 season. Ty Simpson played in that game. He did not play well. He was worse than Jalen Milroe, and he's been named the starting quarterback for the Alabama Crimson Tide entering 2025, and I have my concerns. Now, if you are someone from Alabama or an Alabama fan listening to this, I want to preface my concerns with the fact that I think that Kalen DeBoer and Alabama are going to reach the college football playoffs this year. I think that Kalen DeBoer long-term at Alabama will succeed because of what he did at Washington, Indiana, and Fresno State. I think he's a wonderful offensive mind, a fantastic head coach. Is he Nick Saban? No, but no one is Nick Saban, not even Kirby Smart, who's the closest thing to it. So I want to preface my concerns with that. I'm picking Alabama to go to the playoffs. I think that their offense will be good, and the defense is a topic for another video. That'll be fantastic. But in this instance here, Simpson winning the job outright, kind of this early, when there was a lot of competition in the spring and early in fall camp, and when Simpson has been involved previously in quarterback competitions, and Milroe beat him out 2 times. Pretty substantially the first time, I will add, where Saban wanted someone else, Simpson or Buckner, to be better than Milroe, and they were entirely incapable of being better, even against a lesser team like the South Florida Bulls. So Simpson's been named the starting quarterback, and despite being a redshirt junior, he is green in part. He's played at different times throughout 2023 and 2024. Last season, he was 14 of 25, completed 56% of his passes for 167 yards and averaged just under 7 yards per pass attempt. And again, he saw limited action. He was a 98 overall recruit in the 2022 class per 24/7 Sports. He's a redshirt junior. 6'2", 208 pounds. My biggest concern with him is not his potential. He has a lot of that. It's the idea that Milroe was so bad as a passer, and that was revealed early in 2023, and it got revealed to us again in 2024, where I think Alabama brought in a better staff situated for developing quarterbacks. I think that Kalen DeBoer and his staff at Alabama right now, and even last year when they didn't have Grubb, was better situated to help quarterbacks and develop them than some of Saban's final staffs, whether it was with Bill O'Brien or whether it was Tommy Rees, for example, as Saban's offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. And despite last season and the year prior, where Milroe had his struggles, had his meltdowns, cost the team some games where if you gave Alabama Will Howard or J.J. McCarthy or Carson Beck or Stetson Bennett or certainly Cam Ward or Quinn Ewers, Cade Klubnik, so many other quarterbacks, where they would have won games that Milroe lost for Alabama, and they couldn't put Simpson in. They didn't do it. So that tells you they knew who was better. Even though Simpson theoretically fits DeBoer's system and Grubb's system better than Milroe did. And I know that Grubb is here now and he wasn't in 2024. So that is an upgrade for Alabama that I'm certainly taking into consideration. That's probably one of my bigger reasons why I think Alabama goes over their 9.5 win total and reaches the playoffs. But it's a similar story, but not entirely similar for Arch Manning versus, say, Quinn Ewers, for example, where Manning is more talented than Ewers, but Ewers was good enough and elite enough when healthy and had enough knowledge of the playbook to where that experience and flashes of his upside were invaluable. And Manning certainly had a lower floor. Well, Milroe had the floor of Arch Manning with nowhere near the ceiling. I mean, Ewers' ceiling compared to Milroe's when it matters in the big games is way higher. And Manning's ceiling, I think, is even higher than Ewers was. So some have made that comparison before. Well, Manning didn't start over Ewers last year, so that's a big problem. That could be a yellow flag, certainly, but I don't think it's the same possibly red flag that we're seeing here, where Milroe at times was a straight-up liability, and yet Simpson couldn't come in and replace him, couldn't start ahead of him. And the time when he did, the lone time, when Saban wanted him to, he couldn't put it together. He looked like an absolute disaster against a G5 team. Now, that was back in 2023, so I'm giving DeBoer and Grubb and Simpson himself some benefit of the doubt here. He is mobile. He was a dual threat out of high school. He's poised, and he has a good arm. And ultimately, I think that he will be a good quarterback for the 2025 season, and that he will lead Alabama to an improved year compared to last season, and he does fit the system better. He's not the same dynamic athlete, but I do think that he will have a better arm and certainly be more accurate and be able to progress through his reads better than Milroe did. So that overall will probably produce an upgrade for Alabama. But I'm telling you that I am concerned a little bit that maybe that's not true, given how we couldn't beat out Milroe. And even if he's better than Milroe last year, his previous struggles and his previous inability to surpass Milroe could be an indication that he's not going to be Michael Penix Jr., for example, and he was very helpful to Washington. If Alabama had 2023 Michael Penix as their starting quarterback this year, I would be putting them in Atlanta, and they would be hosting a playoff game for sure. I might even pick them to potentially win it all, but they don't have that right now. They have Ty Simpson, who is green, despite being a player who's entering year 4, has a lot of talent. I think he'll be a top 25 quarterback, but there is some variability there, both in the positives and in the negatives. I'm curious to see whether what I'm saying is true at all, and we see some reasons why he didn't beat out Jalen Milroe, maybe in that week 1 game against Florida State or throughout the college football season. Got a little bit of an itch in my nose. I hate that I get those. Absolutely hate it. Okay, but we're done with the quarterback battle section, guys. Make sure, again, if you haven't already, to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. And again, we'll be answering questions at the end of the stream, whether it's a super chat or just a normal question. Feel free to answer it down below. I do not get... I imagine it's heat and humidity. I imagine so. Again, do not have ideal AC, but that's okay. All right, we will move on, and we will talk about Michigan and whether or not Michigan can win the national championship in 2025. Geez, that's really bugging me. Really, really bugging me. But we're going to talk about that now, if Michigan can win it all in 2025 or not. And it's so interesting because they're only 2 years removed from a national championship. So logically, you would think to yourself, well, of course they can win it all. Like, why couldn't they win it all? And they were contenders in 2022, realistic contenders. They could have beaten that Georgia team. They weren't really contenders in 2021. They would have had to have avoided Georgia and had Alabama do their dirty work, and then maybe because of some favorable matchups, they could have beaten Alabama. But I wouldn't have picked them to beat Alabama. Neither would you, or should you have done that if that was a hypothetical matchup in 2021. And yet, last year, they were so far from the college football playoff, from the national title landscape. They were just so far away from that. Very far away from that. But they bring in Bryce Underwood. They are top 25 in returning production. Can they win it all in 2025? Is that even a possibility? And by a possibility, I mean, is there a 1% chance or greater? Not a fractional percentage chance, because then you're getting into really lightning in a bottle stuff. And we can't predict what lightning in a bottle even means year to year. We can't. It's very hard. So let's get into this and let's talk about it. So can the Michigan Wolverines win it all in 2025? At the end of the 2025 season, is it possible for Brycen Moore, Bryce Underwood, Rayshawn Benny, and the Michigan Wolverines to hoist the 2025 national championship? Is it possible for them to hoist that trophy? They're plus 3,500 right now in odds per FanDuel. That's 11th to win it all. They're 10th in preseason S&P Plus and 17th in preseason FPI. So Michigan's at least viewed as a college football playoff contender. A surefire one at that. Not surefire to make it, but certainly in the mix entering the 2025 season per power ratings, per the odds. That's an encouraging sign and an encouraging step. But getting to the playoffs, now that there's 12 available slots, is vastly different from actually being capable of winning it all. And we've seen this. We saw it last season. Was SMU ever winning it all? No. Even Tennessee. Tennessee was never winning it all. They were not capable of winning it all. Was Boise State or Arizona State ever going to win it all? No, absolutely not. And Clemson wasn't going to either, at least with the staff they had. Maybe if they had a better staff with the talent that was on their roster, then they could have. But that's a topic for another day. You see my point. I want to start off by looking at their 2025 roster and a little bit of an overview with that, because that's where you have to start. If you don't have the roster to win it all, even if you have an elite staff, say Mark D'Antonio, Michigan State, 2023 Washington, I think that 2022 TCU had an underrated staff. I think that Rhett Lashley at SMU is a great staff right now. I think even Brent Key at Georgia Tech has had some pretty great staffs. Oregon State and Michigan State under Jonathan Smith, for example. Even if you have elite staffs, if you do not have the talent, you will not win it all. You just won't. So, does Michigan have that talent? Well, they return 13 starters, 8 on offense, 5 on defense, and they bring back 65% of their 2024 production, which is 24th. Michigan is around 50% in blue chip ratio. That means about half of their roster is made up of 4- and 5-star players. So they're pushing that. If you look at transfers and adjust the rosters for transfers, they're just under that 50% threshold for the blue chip ratio. If you just look at simply every recruiting class since 2022, well, they're above that. But I think it's a little bit more realistic to look at the transfers, especially since Michigan brought in a lot of bodies and only a handful of them were quality. A lot of them were depth pieces. Michigan returns their head coach and defensive coordinator, Sharon Moore and Wink Martindale, along with 9 assistant coaches, including Lou Esposito, including Lamar Morgan, Brian Jean Mary, Newsome, the offensive line coach, Tony Alford, the running backs coach. They're 14.6 points superior to the average team in FPI, per FPI, which is where that 17th placement comes from. And they're viewed as 21.5 points superior to the average college football team per S&P Plus. That's from Bill Connolly. That explains their 10th placement in his preseason power ratings. And their strength of schedule varies from high 20s to high 30s in terms of placement. FPI has it as the 29th toughest. S&P Plus has it as the 38th toughest. Pretty favorable schedule, given the talent they have, the returning production they have, and their preseason power rating. So that's an encouraging start, you would certainly think. Moving on to what Michigan needs to do, because Michigan's team last year was nowhere close to winning it all. You'd have to change multiple fundamental things about Michigan's nature in 2024. Number 1, superior quarterback play. Number 2, you'd probably want to have at least a wide receiver 1. Number 3, you'd want to have a better staff last year for Michigan. One that knew the team and knew what game plans they could draw up with the roster they had, and not last year's staff who was clearly figuring things out on the fly until about November when they finally were able to settle down a little bit. Michigan in 2025 needs superior quarterback play. They had an average passer rating, team passer rating, of an 111.9, which was 121st. They were dead last, 134th in FBS, in yards per catch at 8.8. So they need better receivers, or at least better receiver involvement. Maybe if the receivers don't get better, you need some amazing scheme to get them open, or a quarterback who can perfectly place the ball so at least, they can have an opportunity to occasionally break out here and there and make big plays. Michigan also needs to, and quarterback play and better receiver involvement will help this a lot, but so will overall better assessing your depth and having superior development here. Which Michigan's development, not saying it's bad, it's just an unknown right now. They need to play in fewer close games and pull away more. They had a 5-3 record. 5-3 record in close games last year. And that's counting the Washington and Illinois game where they technically lost by double digits, but it was a close game in the fourth quarter. I'd like to count those. It's like with Illinois. Illinois wasn't 5-1 in close games. They were 6-2. The Penn State game was close, although I think that Penn State really dominated them for much of that game. It was still within one score for much of the game. And then that was one of their close losses along with Minnesota, and their win over Michigan was a close win. Even though it was 21-7 the final, it was a one-score game for much of the matchup. So counted that as a close game. Michigan had a winning record there. It's typically not a good sign for improvement. I think that's offset by Michigan's passing attack and offensive coordinator being historically bad. But regardless, fewer close games, the better. You don't typically have a winning record in those every year in a row unless your coaching staff is elite. That's another instance where Michigan needs to improve. That involves with talent usage, putting players in a position where they can win and being good at that. Michigan was not good at that last year. For example, they lost 5 games with 3 first-round picks. Is that national title caliber? No. And they also need better offensive tackle play because when you allow 86 pressures at the rate in which you pass the ball per game, you didn't pass a whole lot, and you still allowed almost 100 pressures in 13 games. That's not good enough. It's not good enough at all. And this schedule is full of opportunities too. So we talked about what Michigan has coming back and how they need to improve in these specific areas, and I think they've addressed some of those. We'll look at this schedule here. Michigan is plus 210 to reach the playoffs and plus 1,000 to win the Big Ten for a reason. It's not just because they're power rated high and the odds makers are expecting Michigan to improve. Week 1, they play New Mexico. Week 2, they play at Oklahoma. Week 3, they host Central Michigan. Week 4, they play at Nebraska. Off the bye in Week 5, they host Wisconsin in Week 6, play at USC Week 7, host Washington Week 8, play at Michigan State Week 9, host Purdue in Week 10, and you got that neutral field game versus Northwestern Week 12, play at Maryland Week 13, and then you host Ohio State in Week 14. There is a chance, it's a slim one, there is a chance where Michigan is favored in all of the games they play. Slim chance. There is a pretty good chance that Michigan's favored in at least 9 of their 12 games, if not 10 of 12. Their most likely games where they will be an underdog is Oklahoma on the road Week 2 and Ohio State at home Week 14. That road trip to USC, I think Michigan should be an underdog, but we'll figure that out when we get there. October is a ways away still. It is a schedule full of opportunity, and I think Michigan, with this schedule, they can win several games. They can go 11-1 or 12-0. They can. Now, again, given the concerns, they could also go 7-5 again, or maybe things totally bottom out and they go 6-6. But looking at this roster and this staff, wide receiver is an obvious weakness. Offensive tackle is a weakness. It's not as obvious as receiver because Michigan does have talent there and returning production. So tackle could be a strength, I think, unlike wide receiver, but it's still questionable entering this year, so I'll tab that as a weakness. DB depth is an area I'm concerned with. Michigan's very deep at the defensive front. They're, I'd say, deep on the offensive line. The question is just how good are their starters there? You know, there's a difference between depth and then straight up being good. You can be mediocre, but then have plenty enough depth to not have a drop-off if your mediocre unit gets injured, for example. I think they have depth at tight end. Do not have depth at quarterback, but typically you don't need that all the time. And I also think they have some depth at running back. DB, I think, is a concern there. You have some good starters, but some shaky starters as well. And then beyond that, if they suffer an injury to key players, I think there's a drop-off there. And game management by the staff is also something I'm a bit concerned about. But everything else, and this includes quarterback, because I'm pretty high on Bryce Underwood. Why did I say Bryce Young? Bryce Underwood, I think, are going to be strengths for this team. And the seniority and the age help too. That's why I think they're at least going to go 500, 7-5 or better. And if everything goes right, they could go undefeated and have a year that Oregon did last year, where you win the Big Ten, get a top seed in the playoffs, but you probably don't win it all because your power ratings and potential-wise are not the best team in America. They're also plus 1,200 to go undefeated, and their toughest game is Ohio State. That's the only game where if both teams play to their absolute ceiling for the year, that Michigan won't win. If Michigan plays to their potential, if everyone in college football were to play to their potential, their absolute potential, and they all played each other, Michigan would probably go 11-1 and lose to Ohio State. That's how it would work. So the Wolverines, while I certainly wouldn't favor them to go undefeated, I think that they have greater odds at doing that than some people, some people anticipate. But regardless of that, I don't think this team is likely to win it all. It's improbable. I would not give them a 1% chance of winning it all or greater. I did list them as a dark horse national championship candidate in a previous video, but I would pull back on that now. You should never say never, but so much would have to go perfectly for Michigan in order for them to win it all. So Penn State, Texas, these are teams that can do what Michigan wants to do, but better at almost every position. You're probably not beating those teams. Ohio State's more questionable, I'd say, than both of those teams in the defensive line, so it will be easier to establish game control against them. But Ohio State also has receivers that you will have a tough time guarding. You get what I'm saying. Michigan has guarded them well every time they've played, but they've still been able to get plays. And Ohio State's defense is good enough to where they could certainly hold Michigan's offense to minimal points, for example. Ohio State's a little bit of a different case because it's also a rivalry game, so let's just take them out of the equation. Even if Michigan mentally owns Ohio State, and even if Ohio State is also down for that year and therefore they're not going to win it all either, you still got to get through Penn State. You got to get through Texas. You have to get through Oregon. And Oregon, that game with Oregon last year with a better staff and quarterback could have been a Michigan win, but it wasn't. And that's a lot going right for Michigan. That's la-la land. That's fantasy. Right now, Michigan has questions at staff. They have questions at so many different roster positions. I would say lightning in a bottle. If lightning in a bottle happens, they can win it all. And even most teams can't say that. But realistically, it's improbable. It's probably not possible, again, unless lightning in a bottle happens. And that really doesn't count here. They are not one of these teams that I would tab as a potential national champion. So again, never say never, but so much the schedule remaining as light as I think it is, the roster and every position panning out in a positive way, probably includes Underwood being an alien in year one and a top 5 quarterback, not exactly out of the gate, but at least at the end of the year. Michigan's receivers emerging and game management improving. That is so much to go right in one single season after we've seen some pretty negative evidence that contradicts the idea that Michigan right now is a national title contender from last year. I think Michigan's at least a year, if not maybe 2 years away from being a team that can hoist the national championship trophy. Now we can move on and talk about my top 5 most impactful Nebraska players. That's what we're going to be talking about right now. So, yeah, I'm excited. Let's get into it because most of these players are on offense, but there's some on defense, and I think some of these players will be rather surprising to you all. Obviously, we have Dylan Raiola on here, so we're going to start off with him. Here are my top 5 most impactful Nebraska football players for the 2025 season. Which Cornhuskers will impact their team the most in a positive, we hope, way. Of course, these players, if they don't pan out or if they fail or get hurt, these will also impact their team negatively. But I'm pretty high on Nebraska this year relative to their past, and these players are all good players who I think will push Nebraska in a positive direction. Let's start off with Dylan Raiola. Raiola is a 6'3", 230-pound quarterback who emulates his game around Patrick Mahomes. Sophomore, true sophomore, started last year in all 13 of Nebraska's games. 99 overall recruit in the 2024 class. He is 7-6 as a starter with Nebraska, and that was as a true freshman. You know, Adrian Martinez played as a true freshman for Nebraska. He was pretty talented, but he didn't lead him to a bowl game. Didn't do it. And yeah, I know that was a different era, and he didn't have the same coaching staff, but still, he led Nebraska to their first bowl game since 2016. So there's something to that there. 7-6 is winning for Nebraska as of right now. Hope to raise the standards yet again in 2025, but we'll see. Last season, he completed 67.1% of his passes, 275 completions for 410 attempts. He had a 129.9 passer rating and a 63.8 QBR. Passed for 2,819 yards, averaged about 7 yards per attempt with 13 touchdowns and 11 interceptions, and he got sacked 27 times. Need to improve on the awareness in the pocket, get more mobile. Raiola's even said that he is working on being a more mobile, nimble quarterback, has spoken about his experience being invaluable, praised his teammates, and praised Holgorsen. And Holgorsen and Rule have praised Raiola. He's obviously number one. He has to be. Because if he takes a step forward, and let's say he is as good as we expect DJ Lagway to be, and him and Lagway were a part of the same class, similar rating out of high school, I think Lagway probably has at least a higher ceiling, mostly due to the mobility. But passing-wise, I'd say their ceilings are pretty similar. And Raiola was given a future first-round grade coming out of high school in his recruiting class and was the number one quarterback per 24/7 Sports. So the way that I see it, if Raiola is this top 10, top 5 quarterback, and there is a world where that happens, especially with Holgorsen, and the fact that Holgorsen, well, is, he's technically in year 1.5 because he was brought on the staff last year. This is truly year one. He's finally able to install what he wants to run. If Raiola's that good, this team can go 11-1, and their only loss is to Penn State. That's possible. That's straight up possible here. However, if he is once again mediocre like last year, with how much Nebraska lost on defense and the amount of turnover that their defensive staff and really overall roster suffered, they could go 6-6 again, and it will be a very disappointing season. I definitely think that he will be a top 20, if not top 15 quarterback for 2025. I think that he will improve in all of his numbers: completion percentage, passer rating, QBR. I expect him to pass for more than 3,500 yards. He'll average probably, I think, around 8 yards per attempt. And I think that he will have a 2-to-1 or better TD to interception ratio. And I think certainly certainly double his passing touchdowns. Certainly. I think that Nebraska will probably play with a bit more urgency and tempo. At least I would expect. Maybe I'm wrong there. And I think they'll certainly be explosive, and that's even more important. So Raiola is my most impactful Cornhusker entering 2025. Second most, I think, is Dane Key, because part of the reason Raiola threw 11 interceptions last year is because receivers weren't good. There were 2, if not 3 plays where he had touchdowns or completions, and the opposing DB just yanked it out of his wide receiver's hands, and it was counted as an interception. It really wasn't on Raiola, it was on his receivers. Key is also 6'3", 210 pounds. He's a senior, 91 overall player in the 2022 class, and he was a 93 overall rated player in the transfer portal. He's played in 36 games with Kentucky. Veteran, experienced, and he's never had a quarterback, ever, as good as Raiola. Will Levis at Kentucky is not going to be as good as Raiola will be this season. Key had 47 receptions for 4.3 per game. 715 total yards last year, averaged 15.2 yards per reception. That's 65 yards per game, and he had 2 total touchdowns, both receiving. Because quarterback play at Kentucky has consistently been worse, has devolved every year Key's been there. So 2023 was worse than 2022, and 2024 was worse than 2023. And Key's numbers have stayed the same, which means he's getting better. And the reason his statistics and numbers are staying the same is the quarterback play is getting dramatically worse. And also the schedule's getting tougher. I think Key is going to have a breakout year with Nebraska this season. I would not be shocked at all if he had 1,000 receiving yards and even close to 10 touchdowns. That wouldn't shock me. Cornhusker number 3 in terms of impactfulness is Emmett Johnson. We know, because of the group that Nebraska's offensive line is, and also Dana Holgorsen, the schemer, that the rushing attack is going to be better than last year. Last season's rushing attack was bad. It was awful. The offensive line could not run block. The play calls were pretty basic. You kind of knew what was coming for a lot of the Marcus Satterfield era. That era is gone. It's no more. And Emmett Johnson is going to be a useful player, both a gadget player and an oftenly relied upon back, if that's even proper English. That's who Emmett Johnson's going to be. He's going to be a do-it-all back with Dana Holgorsen. 200 pounds at 5'11", and he's a redshirt junior, was just an 85 overall, modest 3-star in the 2022 class. Emmett Johnson has transformed beyond that He's a better player than he was projected to be out of high school. Speaks to the development of Nebraska there. Emmett Johnson has played in multiple games with Nebraska, several of them. He's played in 21 games with the Cornhuskers. He had last season 598 yards on the ground, averaging 5.1 yards per carry, averaged about 50 rushing yards per game. And it's unfortunate because I think he was the better back than Dowdell, and yet he didn't get the same usage as Dowdell. And I think that relates back to the fact that Satterfield really didn't know what he was doing in large part as the offensive coordinator, because once Holgorsen came in, even without installing everything he wanted to, because you can't do that in just a few weeks, he utilized Johnson far more. And Johnson had 3 total touchdowns last year, 1 rushing and 2 receiving. He also did all of that on 117 carries. He averaged 5.1 yards per carry behind an offensive line that I think straight up was pretty mediocre, if not bad, last year. That unit certainly should improve this season, though, in part because of incoming transfer guard Rocco Spindler. As a redshirt senior, 95 overall in the 2021 class, 325 pounds at 6'5". He is big, he is long, he is powerful. 70.5 offensive grade with 747 snaps, had about a 70.3 run blocking grade and a 71.8 pass blocking grade. He has a career 1,325 snaps with Notre Dame, which is where he transferred from. I think that he will be a fringe All-American caliber guard. Based on his play with Notre Dame, filling in for some injured players, he did very well. He did rather well. Was a good guard. Doesn't have probably much of an NFL future, but also offensive linemen, I think, typically like to stay. They like to stay a long time because it's a position of chemistry. It's a position where you don't start immediately as a youngster. It takes evolution. It takes being in a college strength and conditioning program. It takes technique. So he wasn't going to start with Notre Dame, but how about that? After years of not having a good offensive line, you bring in Spindler, you have good development and good players coming back already that were, on a mediocre unit last year, but the good ones come back and you weed out some ones that weren't so good, and you have a much better scheme to help them. You have some continuity. And what if you send off Spindler to the NFL, has a great career there, gets selected high, and you have a good offensive line in 2025? These things are possible. Spindler, if somehow he gets injured or doesn't pan out, then the offensive line, I think, is significantly worse, especially on the interior. And Nebraska cannot afford that with, I think, the struggles at tackle that Nebraska's been reporting out of fall camp. And last but not least, we got Sear Wright, the only defensive player on this list. Wright could certainly be higher, but I have much more players on offense for this top 5 impactful players list because I think the offense is going to be dramatically better. The offense is where most of the talent is concentrated. It's where the best coordinator is concentrated. It's where the most money is concentrated. It's where a historic recruit, a possible game changer, is located. Hello, Dylan Raiola. That's why we're the most impactful player on this list. The defense loses a ton, and I think Nebraska's impactful staffers are on defense because I think they made a lot of upgrades there. Obviously, upgrading your wide receivers coach into Keel Shorts was a good move, but they made, whether it's Phil Snow being kind of a guide for the defense or some other position coaches they hired there, I think your more impactful staffers for this year are on defense, but your most impactful players are usually on offense here. A lot of these players on defense, they have good potential, but do they have the potential Raiola, Key, Johnson, or parts of the offensive line do, or even some of the tight ends? I don't exactly think so. Wright is the exception to that. At 6 foot, 180 pounds, very old player, redshirt senior, he brings experience, and also he is talented. Last year, he had a 72.2 defensive grade with 535 snaps. He had a 85 run defense grade and a 69 coverage grade with 313 snaps for coverage and 214 for run defense. Wright is a very impactful corner for Nebraska and a player who I think will serve the secondary well, be the best player on the secondary, and I think be one of the best players on defense, if not the best player, along with being a key leader on that side of the football. So you got Dylan Raiola, Emmett Johnson, Dane Key, Rocco Spindler, and Sear Wright. Those are my top 5 most impactful players for Nebraska entering the 2025 season. If all of them play extremely well, even if some other positions have issues, I wouldn't be shocked if Nebraska reaches the playoffs. Would not be shocked at that. If one of them disappoints or there are other rooms that just have major issues, even if those players are good, well, Nebraska should still be able to finish as, I think, a top 25 team for the first time since the Bo Pelini era. Now we can talk about USC and their potential. Sorry about some of the typos in that Nebraska video, but I don't think most people will notice that. Yeah. This has been one of the better shows in recent memory. Make sure right now, guys, to send in your super chats and questions. So start typing away, send your super chats, send your questions, because we're going to have a 30-minute question and answer session after this USC segment. And that USC segment starts right now. USC has not played to its potential since the Pete Carroll era. These are facts. Where USC under Pete Carroll repeatedly destroyed Big Ten teams in the Rose Bowl. They won 2 national championships, competed for a third, and lost to a generational college player in Vince Young and a wonderful, epic Texas team. Ever since Carroll left, and really ever since the final year of the Carroll era, they have played below their ceiling. They have not played big boy, blue blood football. They haven't. Well, with the number 2 or number 1 recruiting class, depending on where you look, with a variety of staff upgrades, an elite defensive coordinator, a quarterback and offensive guru as the head coach, and look, a coach and staff that's under pressure. Pressure can either break you or build diamonds. I want to entertain you all and show you what USC playing to its potential looks like. That's what I want to talk about here. So the Trojans, they're one of the best college football programs. They are a definitive blue blood. And right now, in fact, they're viewed as the 6th best program historically per Kyle Umlang, who's the expert, the blue blood expert. He has this really intricate, carefully calculated formula where you plug in NFL players, Hall of Famers, national champions, AP poll appearances, wins, conference championships, All-Americans, unanimous All-Americans, you name it. There's more that he plugs in and spits out this number determining where your team is ranked historically. USC is one of the 8 blue bloods, and they are not 8th. They are the 6th best per Kyle Umlang. And with where USC is heading, and with the fact that they have an estimated 3,900 alumni worth $30 million or more, just look up ultra-wealthy alumni by college, and you will find multiple reports from different sources where, yeah, USC has thousands of alumni who are ultra-wealthy, multi-millionaires, some even billionaires. Don't trust me. Look it up for yourself. Do some searching and do some research. They are one of the wealthiest blue bloods in college football by alumni base. And many of the schools who are wealthier than them are Ivy Leagues who don't play FBS ball, or they're Stanford who aren't as invested as USC is, for example. Sadly, it'd be beautiful to have Stanford good again. But we're talking about USC here. They also have an elite recruiting base. In 2024, 278 active NFL players were from California. They only trailed Texas and Florida in that regard. Georgia's catching up, but we've seen Lincoln Riley and his staff try to recruit Georgia, had a lot of failures, had some successes, and I imagine if all goes to plan and USC starts winning again, they'll be able to pull some recruits out of the South in addition to getting many players, great players, and developing them from the state of California. USC is also inside the Power 2, so they're no longer inside the Pac-12, which was pretty directionless. They're in one of the most prominent conferences, the Big Ten, and they are one of the biggest brands inside a Big Ten conference that is going toe-to-toe with the SEC. They also have a proven head coach in Lincoln Riley, who has had 5 conference championship game appearances, 3 college football playoff berths. Lincoln Riley wins an estimated 70% of his close games. That includes last year's disaster in close games, and he's 81-24 as a coach. 4 Big 12 championships, a Pac-12 championship game appearance where starting quarterback gets hurt, Utah ends up winning it, but still made it in year one. And last year they were only one of a few teams that led or tied every team they played in the fourth quarter. I think the other teams were Oregon, and Oregon got knocked out in the Rose Bowl. And then you also had, I think, Ohio State. It may have been just USC and Ohio State when it was all said and done. Oh, and I think no, because Texas had that Georgia game. USC was up there. They had a very high ceiling last year, but also had a lower floor than they wanted. That was part of the problem. How do you mitigate that long term? I first and foremost want to give you the 2025 schedule. We can talk about the short term. I want you to think about the long term while we're talking about this, because short term, what does USC playing to its potential look like in 2025? Well, it looks like you start off 5-0. You beat Missouri State week 1, Georgia Southern, Purdue on the road, Michigan State at home, and even Illinois on the road. You don't care about those teams. You have vastly more talent than they do. In theory, you also should have better staffs. But again, circle back, you have deeper rosters, better talent. You should beat all of those teams entering the week 6 bye 5-0. USC's plus 420 to reach the playoffs, and they used to have a lot worse in terms of higher odds. They used to be much higher odds beyond plus 500 to reach the playoffs, but they've come down a bit. And they also used to be beyond plus 2,000 to win the Big Ten. Now they're plus 1,900, viewed as clearly that, tier 2B or tier 3 team behind Michigan and the big three, Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State, to win the Big Ten. And then, off your week 6 bye, you don't lose to Michigan or Notre Dame. You don't get out physicaled by them. You compete with both, and you beat one. You trade blows. You go 1-1 or 2-0. You cannot go 0-2 in that stretch. Or if you do, you have to win every other game. Every other game outside of Oregon on the road week 13. And Nebraska off the week 9 bye in week 10, that's not going to be fun. Northwestern at home should be a win. Iowa at home week 12, they're probably going to be a better matchup than Illinois or Michigan State because they're bigger, more talented. They have a quarterback finally on top of having a really good defense and special teams unit. Week 13 at Oregon, that's going to be very challenging, but you also beat UCLA in week 14. Playing to your potential as USC football in 2025 means that you go 9-3 at the worst. You don't go any worse than that. Now, I'm not saying that's the only acceptable record. I think 8-4 is acceptable, and anything worse than that's just a complete catastrophe. But the only record that I would say USC should feel good with, not just, okay, we crossed the bar, now we have to do it again, but good about, I feel good, is 9-3. And playing to your absolute potential will yield 10, 11, or even 12 wins. Absolute potential, heck, throw caution with the wind. Absolute potential with this team, with the schedule you have, and the idea that maybe Michigan, Notre Dame, and Oregon could be all overvalued by the books and by the public. And there's a very good chance of that happening. Very good. I already think Notre Dame's a bit overvalued. I think that Michigan is probably properly valued, and I think Oregon is properly valued as well. That's net overvalued. I'm telling you that in the average, Oregon, Notre Dame, and Michigan are more likely to all be worse than expected than all better than expected. Just because of how much Notre Dame and Oregon lose, the coordinator change Notre Dame has, the fact that Michigan lost a lot of high-end talent, and it's not just that because they'll probably be better than they were last year, but being ranked top 15 almost unanimously by power ratings and polls, there's a lot of wiggle room, a lot of margin for error, not just positive, but also negative. And Oregon loses a lot too. They return, I think, only like 5 starters, for example. So that's what it will look like. It'll look like USC dominating 8 or 9 of the teams they play, and against Michigan, Notre Dame, and Oregon, you're competing. You're neck and neck with these guys, and you're at least beating, I would say, one of them. And you can, of course, afford an upset loss. It's not easy to travel to Illinois week 5 or at Nebraska week 10 or host Iowa week 12. And I would say that USC likely won't even play Oregon exactly close. Similar rosters, Oregon's just better at everything. It's kind of how I view it, where Oregon's been an offensive first team for quite a while. USC, it's been similar, although I think USC is the better defensive coordinator than Oregon, but I think that'll take more than 2 years to show on the field because Oregon's just recruited dramatically better. They have bigger bodies, better athletes. That game will be tough given it's an Autzen. But all the other games, I would say, are very winnable, and even the Oregon game is winnable. Oregon is not an invincible team this year. They weren't last year, even though they went 13-0. In 2025, to continue with all of this, how I'm going to back my opinions up is while they only return 8 starters last year, 5 on offense, 3 on defense, and they only bring back half of their production, USC returns their head coach in Lincoln Riley, their de facto offensive coordinator, who's Lincoln Riley, their defensive coordinator, D'Anton Lynn, and 7 other assistant coaches. They have kept their staff together, and in the preseason, they're viewed as 13 points better than the average college football team per FPI and 11 points better per S&P+. Their strength of schedule is also outside of the top 10. 28th per FPI, 20th per S&P+. They don't return a lot. They don't. But they didn't return a lot either entering 2024, and yet they showed moments where they were better than they were in 2023 to a certain degree. They were certainly much better on defense, and I think certainly were a much better team in big games because they had that extra physical element, and they were tougher and better on defense while maintaining really the same overall upside on offense at every position but quarterback. And that mattered a lot, and that clearly showed its ugly head last season. But I imagine with Maeva, and Maeva fits the traditional Lincoln Riley quarterback more than Miller Moss does, I'd expect quarterback to improve. I think a lot of positions that lost talent will in fact improve because you're losing a lot of players who were exclusively coached by Benny Wiley or even some by Clay Helton, a lot of transfers, a lot of players who are coached by Grinch, and now you're getting even more players who are D'Anton Lynn's or have been trained by him. You're also going to have Tremaine Carroll involved this season. Of course, he's not going to have a full year of effect because Wiley was moved on from, was fired in the spring, but there will be some impact, I think. This team should be better than last year's team, for sure, and USC playing at its potential in 2025, I think will yield a college football playoff berth. That's what that would yield. And maybe because it's Riley and because I think they have a really good defensive coordinator on top of a really good offensive play caller, and Riley knows how to work with quarterbacks, especially transfers, especially players that he can get them to play in game pretty quickly, or they've already showcased themselves in college. I think there's a chance they could even be a dark horse national champion. But let's look to the future. In the future, USC should expect to reach the playoffs annually. You are a blue blood. You can recruit at a high level. You've been better at development, and you've had your grace period. You now need to reach the CFP annually, and when you don't, it's a failure. That doesn't mean you go out and fire people, because sometimes you have a down year. That means you need to do some self-reflection. If you need to make staff changes or roster changes, you do. You should expect to reach the playoffs annually after this season. This season, you don't need to reach it. It'd be awesome if you did, but you don't need to. You should also expect to compete in the Big Ten annually. That does not mean making it to Indy every year. It's different. What I mean is in November, you are in the running where there is a way for you to get there in November. It's much harder to reach the Big Ten championship game than reaching the playoffs. Reaching Indy or Atlanta or any championship game now, unless you're in the Big 12, is harder than getting to the playoffs. It just is. You have to have a certain amount of luck, more luck, to get to a conference title game, especially in the Big 2, than getting to the playoffs. But you should be competing for the Big Ten championship game yearly. And as for the national championship, I think every blue blood should expect at least one every 10 years. Little asterisk there, that's Nebraska. I don't think Nebraska should quite expect that until they're reaching the playoffs consistently. Every other blue blood, the other 7, 8 if you want to count Penn State. I count Penn State, but I know not everyone does, so just wanted to shout that out there. They should expect to win a national title once every 10 years. And if they don't, then that is a failure, and you need to work at getting to that point. And some blue bloods, and occasionally some teams that aren't blue bloods, like Oregon, for example, they should expect to win it all once every 10 years. And some blue bloods, I'd say like Ohio State or Alabama, given recent history and how they're unanimously the top two blue bloods, really, they should expect, I think, depending on circumstance, to win it all twice every 10 years at minimum. So the Trojans, from here on out, things need to get better, and they need to get better pretty quickly. I think they can. And that is in part because I think right now, under the current NIL structure, current recruiting rules, they are a top 5 recruiting program. They have a top 15 staff, I think, right now. And they've churned out NFL talent before. People can win at USC before. Think of USC in the 20th century. Think about the Pete Carroll era. I love the outlook of this team. And the reason I'm setting the expectations high and telling you that when they play to their potential, they can be a dynasty is because that's factually correct. When USC is rolling, they are a dynasty. Look at those teams in the 2000s under Pete Carroll. If the playoff existed back then, I'm very, very confident that Pete Carroll would have more than 2 national championships. And that's it. That's it right there. Now we're on to the question and answer session. We're on to that. So if you have a super chat, if you have any questions you just plainly want to, we do have a super chat. This is very good. Very good. So let me drag out that super chat here. Let me do that. And where did... Oh, that's where it went. It was hiding from me a little bit, the pop-out chat. This is from Blue Wolverine. Oh, so this is something we can talk about, because this is anything we can talk about. We can really talk about anything college football related. But first, we'll get to the super chat here from Blue Wolverine. Hello, Sam, says Blue Wolverine with a wave. Hey, Blue Wolverine, it's nice to see you in here. Thank you for the $5 super chat. I really appreciate the support. Really appreciate it. Thanks. And hope that we can see you around here daily on the live shows. MSU #1 fan responded to Blue Wolverine saying, go green. He also says, I think Georgia Tech beats UGA. I have that set in the predictions so far, that Georgia Tech will beat Georgia. But I have to rethink some of my predictions, because this weekend I'm going to be releasing updated predictions. And I'm not going to be changing much, but there are going to be some things that I will change. Max Ellis, Sam, who do you think are the most over-underrated teams based on the AP poll versus where you have them? Oh, good question. I wanted to get to this today, but I didn't have the time. I had to do some other things for the channel, more cosmetic things. I will give you at least one team each, and then tomorrow there will be a whole segment on that live talking about some others. So, just a minute. Had to briefly think there. Briefly think. Illinois. Illinois is vastly overrated. It's not even close. They have no business being 12th. No business. And Based 4L, his comment, I would say, is correct. That USC is the most underrated. It's either USC, or one could be more cynical and say that it is Nebraska. I say that's more cynical due to recent history and the fact that USC is better talent. But Nebraska, I think, is underrated. I think USC is too. South Carolina is overrated too, along with Illinois. Like those two, Illinois just won so many close games, and they returned so much mediocre players. They're taking a step back. And then South Carolina loses everyone outside of their secondary quarterback and Dylan Stewart. So, yeah. Saray and Taylor Slots. Sam, do you see Nebraska making a national championship by 2030? No, I do not. And I don't see that happening because right now, Nebraska, it just straight up, they are not good enough at recruiting, at development, at game management. I have to see them make the playoffs before I even make that prediction. I do. Straight up. Yeah. I wish I could say yes, but I can't. I sadly can't do that. I wish I could say yes. So with Indiana and Michigan now not making the playoffs, according to you, which Big Ten team will step up in their place to make the playoffs? Interesting. So I don't think Indiana's making it again. As of right now, I didn't say in that segment that I don't think Michigan will make it. I said I don't think they'll win it all. So I'm lower on Michigan's ceiling than I was about a month ago. But it's really between them and Ohio State for who I think is going to make it. I am much more confident in Ohio State losing to Texas and Penn State than I am to Michigan. It sounds weird. It does, given the recent history, but I think that Penn State is going to be several touchdowns better than Michigan. Several. So I think that for Ohio State, especially with how they're going to start off, and I think they're going to start off, the national media, I think, is about A-OK on Ohio State, but I don't think they've processed what that means if they really believe in Texas the way they do, if they really believe in Penn State the way they do. I think that ultimately it's, I don't have Indiana making it, and I replaced them with Alabama because I have Alabama making it at 10-2. It's between Michigan and Ohio State really for that final Big Ten slot. I think that Oregon is going to get in. Oh, USC too. I have USC making it. I think that Oregon and Penn State are your most likely CFP participants from the Big Ten. Oregon has the luxury of not playing Texas, and they both Ohio State and Oregon play Penn State. Oregon plays them on the road, but they don't play Michigan on the road. You'd rather have Ohio State. You'd rather have Oregon's toughest games than Ohio State's toughest games. Straight up, you'd much rather have those. So, yeah, I think that Oregon and Penn State are surefire to reach the well, I won't say Oregon. I'll say Penn State's a lock to reach the playoffs. Oregon and Ohio State are closer, but not quite locks, and I'd put Oregon slightly ahead of Ohio State there in terms of odds. Behind them, I think USC and Michigan are next, along with Indiana, kind of bunched together. Indiana would only have worse odds because they play Oregon and Penn State on the road, so their schedule is tougher than USC and Michigan, I think. At least conference schedule is, and their brand is smaller, on top of having more talent restrictions. So I will be honest in looking at my Big Ten predictions and trying to reassess them, that Ohio State Michigan game is one that I'm really going to be taking another close look at, because I don't think Ohio State or Michigan are going to. I think that neither Ohio State or Michigan is going to satisfy their fan base or really come close to that this year. I think that Michigan will eke out some close wins. I think that their losses to USC and Oklahoma will both be close, and I think they'll probably win a close game or two. And there will be other games where they pull away in the second half, but entering halftime, it's you're biting nails. And then if they beat Ohio State or lose to Ohio State, it's probably going to be a close win or close loss. So, and at the end of the day, they're going to be a little bit puffed up due to the schedule if they go to the playoffs, and then the ending for Michigan will be disappointing. And as for Ohio State, we've talked about this before. I think that nationally they're probably properly rated, maybe a little bit overrated, but some underrate them a bunch. I'm seeing polls where people are saying that, this Ohio State team would beat the 2020 team, and that I think matchup-wise that might be a little bit crazy. I don't know. I don't. I think that, Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs return. I get it. Alabama in 2023 had several players that should have been aliens, and some of them were close. None of whom were Jeremiah Smith. None of whom. But that team, if they were not coached by Saban, and if the schedule lined up differently, could have gone 8-4. And they had all the talent in the world. I'm not saying Ohio State's going 8-4. They won't. But that Michigan-Ohio State game is going to be really interesting, because I think that Ohio State is going to go 10-2, 9-3, 11-1. I don't think they're going to go 12-0 in the same way I don't think they're going to go 8-4. Michigan is going to go Michigan and Ohio State will have similar records. Ohio State will be power rated better because their schedule's tougher and they have better talent and better coaches. But I think record-wise, they're going to fall in that similar range. Based 4L, thank you for the $2 super chat. And then under that, you said, do you think USC will let up less than 21 points per game? Let me check that here. Let me check that. So, looking at USC's schedule, Missouri State, Georgia Southern, I could see those being shutouts. I could see Purdue being a shutout. So we're going to go best case scenario here. Absolute best case scenario. Michigan State, you'll probably allow in the teens, let's say 14. Illinois, I could see 10. I could see USC holding them 10. So, 14 plus 10. Michigan, I can't really see them holding them to under 17. Michigan just has good enough kicking and a physical enough unit to where they'll score upper teens. Notre Dame, I see Notre Dame putting up at the very worst upper 20s. By then they'll have quarterback figured out. They have some pretty nice receivers. It'll be a road game. I'm gonna go with 27 at the absolute best USC can hold them to. Absolute best. Nebraska, it's on the road. They got Dana Holgorsen. They have receivers. I'm going to say the absolute best case is probably 21. Northwestern, you could shut out Northwestern. Iowa will be good enough on offense, and USC's depth will be worn down by that point to where Iowa's putting up, like, at the absolute worst, probably, I'm going to say 20 points. And I'm going to change, Michigan I won't change because it's off a bye. And Iowa might actually have a better offense than Michigan. They did last year. Why can't they this year? Oregon, with it being at home in an Autzen, that's a game where they're putting up at least 31 points. At least. And then for UCLA, you could shut them out in theory, but it's a rivalry game, so I won't pick that to happen. They'll, with Nico and some of the talent they have, they'll probably at least score 10. That's 150 points. That divided by 12 would yield 12.5. That's at the absolute best, which will not happen because that's like lightning in a bottle stuff with the roster they have. But yes, let's say you add 7 points to every game or 14 points, some of the bigger games, they could let up less than 21 points per game. But I don't think they'll let up less than maybe 3 total possessions. So I think the defense at the very best will probably allow 17 points per game. And that's with a pretty workable schedule too. So keep that in mind. Hey Sam, can I join you to talk Spartan football? Thoughts on MSU at Nebraska? Michigan State at Nebraska is going to be pretty interesting. I think that Michigan State can win. Wouldn't favor them to win, but I think Michigan State has a staff edge, and that will be maximized over the bye. And I think that by that point in the year, there's a chance that Michigan State has the better passing offense. Michigan State and Nebraska, I think, are more similar than some people expect this year. More so because I'm high in Michigan State, not because I'm low in Nebraska. And if you want to join my show, email me at College Football with Sam, and we can talk about that later. But probably not. Probably not. I try to, keep it to mostly, mostly like people who have other shows. But email me. I'm not going to say it's 100% impossible. Email me at collegefootballwithsam@gmail.com. Spelled exactly as it sounds. Would have loved to see Oregon play Texas last year. I think those were the second and third best teams last year, says Kevin Chavis. I think Penn State was better than Oregon. I just think that Penn State had James Franklin and Oregon had a fire lit up. I think Lanning does a better job of getting motivation out of his players, did a better job game planning. And also, Penn State's secondary last year was was underwhelming, very underwhelming. The only reason Ohio State didn't put like 30 on that Penn State defense is because Howard turned it over multiple times, and he was also pretty inaccurate downfield. Like, Ohio State's receivers were eating those DBs. We're eating them for breakfast. Now, I don't think that'll happen again this year because I think Penn State, with a better scheme, better DC, returning a good portion of their better players at DB, and likely not having the same injury, should get better. I do think Penn State was the superior team. I just think Oregon was a good matchup for them for reasons that I didn't quite see. Do you think Akron can get to 6 wins this year? I don't know enough about the MAC the final quarter. Wish I did, so I could answer your question. But I'm going to go with no. We'll be better able to assess that after we see this year's Ohio State team play. Yes. I would say, so I mean, is that in reference to, that might be in reference to one of the comments I made about Ohio State. I don't know. If you have any more super chats, any more questions, feel free to send them in. We'll be live for a few more minutes, and also make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell. We'll be live for 5-10 more minutes. So if you have a super chat or anything, or just any comments that you have, feel free to send them in. Go Blue. See that in the chat. Someone says that I think Nebraska goes 9-3 this year with losses to Penn State, Minnesota, Michigan, or USC. Penn State's a surefire loss. I can see a world where Nebraska is undefeated entering the Penn State game, and Penn State's also undefeated, or they have one loss to Ohio State, and they beat Nebraska by 40 points. It's a nightmare matchup. There is only one position where Nebraska could be better than, well, actually, it's 2, but they're in bizarro, very unlikely situations. Nebraska could be better than Penn State at quarterback and wide receiver. And it's very unlikely they will be. Every other position, Penn State is guaranteed to be superior. That means safety, corner, linebacker, D-end, D-tackle. I'm including kicker. Well, maybe not kicker. I think Hull has a stronger leg than Barker. Barker's much more accurate. Punter, Penn State's better. Return specialist, Penn State's probably better there. O-line, Penn State dramatically is better. Penn State's second string O-line is probably better than Nebraska's starter O-line. And I love Nebraska's starting O-line. Penn State's just that deep there. Tight end, Penn State's better. Running back, they're better. And quarterback and wide receiver, they should be better based on what they're bringing in and what they bring back. So that game will be a blowout. But every other game for Nebraska is winnable. So I think 9-3 is very realistic. Very realistic. If Nebraska goes 10-2 and reaches the playoff, I'll be emotionally surprised because they just haven't done anything like that. But mentally, I would be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Nebraska could beat Michigan. They could beat Minnesota. In fact, they should beat Minnesota. And they can beat USC, too. They should beat USC. The only games Nebraska shouldn't be expected to win are Penn State and probably the Michigan game. That's it. And Michigan, you should expect to compete and have that game come down to the fourth quarter. Penn State, you should expect to lose. You should be pleasantly surprised if you play Penn State within 3 touchdowns. Pleasantly surprised. But every other game, you should expect to win. Like Nebraska should expect to go 8-4, 9-3 at the worst. But on a game-per-game basis, based on what I see as this team in the preseason, 10-2 would be a reasonable expectation for, like, the only way to get happy. That was a reference to them beating 2020 Ohio State, unless I heard wrong. Yeah, that's what you were responding to. You did not hear wrong. I just have a hard time seeing that. Like, the average college football team is getting worse and worse and worse, even with Georgia, even with Alabama. I don't think Michigan will ever field a team like they did in 2023. I just don't. I hope to be wrong, but I don't think they will. Let me think. I don't think Clemson will field a team like they did in the mid-2010s again. I don't even think this team's capable of that. So the idea that like Ohio State could it's the idea in my mind that I'm seeing people legitimately suggest this team will be just as good as last year's. The odds of that happening are very minimal. Very, 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 very minimal. They are. And they just are. Georgia in 2022 technically had a better record than the 2021 team, but you look at power ratings, and 2021 Georgia was better than 2022 Georgia. Even with the loss, they were viewed as a better team. Why? They were bigger, they were more experienced, they had the better coordinator duo. So many things. So many things. And that was even when Stetson Bennett was better in 22 than he was in 21. So I think that Ohio State can absolutely win it all. But the 2020 team was really good. The reason that defense got totally, destroyed by Alabama was because that Alabama team was a super team. Most offenses weren't going to push that defense baseline, even though it was questionable. And the 2019 team, I don't think Ohio State will ever field a team like that again. Ever. Ever. That team was the best Ohio State team of the 21st century, and now we're in an era with the portal and recruiting being more leveled out than it ever has been, to where I just think it's unlikely. Like, Alabama will not field a 2020 team again. They won't, at least under the current circumstances. If circumstances and rules change, then yes, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, USC, if Michigan gets their act together, like, these blue blood teams can then field GOAT caliber teams again. But it's going to be very, very hard. Like, Penn State, I don't even think Penn State will field a GOAT caliber team. The reason I'm picking Penn State to the main reason I'm actually picking Penn State to do what I think they're gonna do this year, which is be the best Big Ten national champion of recent memory, a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've done a good job retaining their roster, and they got Jim Knowles. Now, Ohio State has two more talented players, for sure, yes. But I also saw how they played last year. In order for Ohio State to field a GOAT caliber team after losing as much as they did, they'll have to be better coached. They had a 90% blue chip ratio last year. 90%, the highest of any national champion, and yet they were the weakest national champion since 2007 LSU. Why was that? Well, you're a little bit thinner at depth. And also because I don't think that team in the aggregate basis was as well coached as several national champions. Like, they just weren't. An example is, take away one of Michigan or one of Georgia's better players, for example. Like, for Georgia, take away Stetson Bennett and replace him with Carson Beck. Take away, for Michigan had J.J. McCarthy, to be fair, so let's not do Michigan. Michigan wasn't as deep as those Georgia teams were in talent. I think Michigan's starters in 22 were better than Georgia's in 22, but the depth, no. Maybe I'm talking in circles, but I think the point I'm trying to make is it's going to be very hard. It's very hard for any team who loses half of their production to get better. I don't think that Texas will be better than they were last year. I think Texas will be pretty similar. I think that Texas will have more favorable matchups in certain cases, but you also have to remember that Texas returns a lot more of their staff than Ohio State does, and Texas's roster is improving. They are leveling up their talent. Ohio State is not. Ohio State's maintaining. Whatever they've shown us as of now, whatever they've shown us is who they are. They can go 16-0 one day maybe, or 15-1, because winning games is correlated with talent, but it's not an exact science. It's not exactly aligned with talent. But at the same time, we know who Ohio State is. We've seen their ceiling. We saw 2019. We saw last year. We have not seen Texas's ceiling yet. And for all that being said, my intuition tells me that Ohio State's going to beat Texas in week 1. Maybe that's wrong, but oh well. Any more questions? Any more super chats that y'all have? Thought this was one of our better streams recently, even though it was filled with, limited content, really only 5 segments, and a pretty solid question and answer session. This question and answer session, by the way, is going to be rare, so I'll continue to answer super chats as we build the show, but we'll get back to answering your questions that you send in the Discord. Just these past few weeks has been, busy. And I'm actually, as you probably saw in the animations, I'm trying to change little bits of the inside of the channel, make it more professional, more sleek. So how about you guys who have any more questions right now, join the Discord server. Link I just published, I just posted it right there. Join it, it's totally free. Navigate to the hashtag YouTube Mailbox channel and ask any questions that you have. Unless there are any more super chats coming in or a very intriguing question these next few seconds, well, that's going to be all for today. I'm going to give a few seconds just in case anyone has something else. Have you watched the SEC documentary yet? No, I have not, because I no longer have Netflix. But I'll try and find maybe some clips if I can, if I have the time. Good question, the final quarter. Okay, everyone, I'll see you soon. I'm starving, and I have more work to get to because tomorrow we're going to have a pretty big show. I also got a happy early birthday, Sam, says Saray and Taylor Slots. My birthday isn't until November, but I appreciate that. I'll see you.